The sun was setting over Los Angeles, painting the sky in beautiful shades of orange and pink as Tom Miller wheeled himself toward the entrance of the Golden Palm restaurant. The wheels of his chair made a soft whirring sound against the smooth pavement as he approached the elegant glass doors, his military veteran's pin gleaming softly on his navy blue jacket. The restaurant stood tall and proud in downtown La, its warm golden lights spilling onto the sidewalk. Tom had driven past this place countless times over the years, always telling himself that one day he'd have a good enough reason to splurge on a meal here. Today was finally that day. His daughter had just gotten accepted into her dream college with a full scholarship. As he reached for the door, a young couple stepped forward to hold it open for him. Tom smiled, nodding his thanks. The simple gesture reminded him that while some people saw only his wheelchair, others saw him for who he was, a proud father, a veteran, a human being with dreams and celebrations of his own. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with a gentle murmur of conversation and the soft clink of silverware against fine china. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the deep mahogany tables, and the aroma of sizzling steaks and fresh-baked bread filled the air. Tom had saved up for 2 months to afford this dinner, picking up extra hours helping veterans with their paperwork at the local VA office. As he made his way through the dining room, he couldn't help but notice some of the patrons glancing his way. Some looks were curious, others uncomfortable, and a few were openly disapproving of his presence in such an upscale establishment. Tom was used to these looks. They had been part of his life since he returned from his last tour overseas. He had learned to hold his head high and focus on the good things in life, like celebrating his daughter's achievement. In a quiet corner of the restaurant, partially hidden behind an elegant room divider, sat Keanu Reeves. The actor was casually dressed in a black shirt and jeans, his attention focused on a thick script laid out beside his water glass. Unlike many celebrities who demanded private rooms, Keanu preferred to blend in with regular people, though few other diners had noticed him yet. Tom maneuvered his wheelchair toward the host station, where a young man in a crisp black uniform was organizing menus. The reservation had been made weeks ago, and Tom had specifically mentioned his wheelchair to ensure appropriate seating. His daughter would be arriving any minute now, and he wanted everything to be perfect for her special night. The smell of fresh herbs and garlic wafted from the kitchen as a server pushed through the swinging doors with a tray of appetizers. Tom's stomach rumbled slightly. He'd skipped lunch in anticipation of this dinner. He pulled out his phone to check the time, smiling at the excited text his daughter had sent earlier. "Can't wait for our celebration dinner, Dad. Be there in 15. In his corner, Keanu glanced up briefly from his script, his eyes taking in the scene before him. Years of observation had taught him to read people and situations well, and something about the way the host was looking at the man in the wheelchair made him pay closer attention. He set his script aside quietly, picked up his water glass, and watched the scene unfold over its rim. What happened next would turn an ordinary evening into something none of them would ever forget. But at that moment, Tom was simply a proud father waiting to celebrate his daughter's success at a nice restaurant. He had no idea that his quiet dinner would soon become a powerful reminder about human dignity, respect, and the unexpected heroes who stand up for what's right. The gentle music playing overhead masked the tension that was beginning to build at the host station. Tom's fingers tapped nervously on his armrest as he waited to be acknowledged, his veteran's pride wrestling with the growing feeling that something wasn't quite right. Behind him, the LA traffic continued its endless hum, and somewhere in that traffic was his daughter, heading toward what should have been a simple celebration dinner. As Tom waited patiently at the host station, a waiter in his mid-20s approached, adjusting his black bow tie with one hand while carrying a stack of menus in the other. His name tag read Michael, and he'd been working at the Golden Palm for exactly 3 weeks, just long enough to develop an air of superiority, but not long enough to understand the restaurant's true values. "Can I help you?" Michael asked, his voice carrying a note of disdain that made several nearby diners look up from their meals. His eyes darted from Tom's wheelchair to his casual blazer, then to the veteran's pin, barely acknowledging any of them. "Yes, I have a reservation for 2 at 7 o'clock, Tom replied with a warm smile, choosing to ignore the waiter's tone. It should be under Miller. He'd learned long ago that kindness often worked better than confrontation, especially in public places. Michael made a show of flipping through the reservation book, his movements deliberately slow and exaggerated. "I'm not seeing anything here," he said, despite Tom's name being clearly visible on the page. "Are you sure you have the right restaurant?" Tom leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair. "I called 2 weeks ago and spoke with someone named David. I specifically mentioned needing accessible seating." His voice remained steady, though his knuckles had turned white where they gripped his armrests. A couple at a nearby table exchanged uncomfortable glances, their forks pausing midway to their mouths. In his corner, Keanu Reeves set his script down completely, his full attention now focused on the scene unfolding before him. "Listen," Michael said, lowering his voice but not his condescension, "the Golden Palm is a fine dining establishment. We have certain standards." He gestured vaguely at Tom's wheelchair and attire. "Perhaps I could recommend somewhere more suitable. The diner down the street has ramps." The words hung in the air like smoke, heavy and toxic. An older woman at a table near the entrance audibly gasped, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Her husband shook his head disapprovingly, though whether at Tom or the waiter wasn't clear. Tom felt his chest tighten, but years of military service had taught him to keep his composure under fire. "I understand you have standards," he said quietly, his dignity intact. "I also have a confirmed reservation, which I made specifically to celebrate my daughter's college acceptance. She'll be here any minute." Michael's lips curved into what might have been meant as a smile, but looked more like a smirk. "Sir, perhaps you don't understand. We're fully booked tonight." He gestured around the half-empty restaurant. "These tables are reserved for regular customers." A busboy clearing a nearby table slowed his movements, clearly uncomfortable with what he was witnessing. He caught Tom's eye and gave an apologetic look before hurrying away to the kitchen, presumably to find a manager. The gentle piano music playing overhead seemed to mock the tension of the moment. Through the front windows, the last rays of sunlight cast long shadows across the restaurant's polished floors. Tom checked his phone again. His daughter would arrive in less than 5 minutes. "I'm not asking for special treatment," Tom explained, his military training evident in his patient tone. "I'm just asking for the reservation I made, confirmed, and plan to pay for." He pulled up the confirmation email on his phone, holding it up for Michael to see. Michael barely glanced at the screen. "I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Maybe try calling ahead next time." The irony of his statement seemed completely lost on him. "We wouldn't want our other guests to feel uncomfortable." Several diners were now openly watching the exchange, their meals forgotten. Some looked embarrassed, others angry, and a few seemed to be recording discreetly with their phones. The restaurant's warm lighting, meant to create an intimate atmosphere, now felt like a spotlight on this display of discrimination. In his corner, Keanu Reeves slowly pushed his chair back from his table, his face set in a determined expression. The script he'd been reading lay forgotten beside his half-empty water glass. 20 years in Hollywood had taught him about power dynamics and prejudice, and he recognized injustice when he saw it. Tom took a deep breath, preparing to respond, when he heard the restaurant's door open behind him. He knew without turning that it would be his daughter walking in, about to witness something no child should have to see happen to their parent. The moment hung suspended, like a drop of water just before it falls, as the next chapter of the evening was about to unfold. The glass door of the Golden Palm swung open, bringing with it a rush of cool evening air and the sound of city traffic. Emmy Miller stepped inside, her eyes bright with excitement and a small gift bag clutched in her hands. She'd spent her afternoon tutoring job money on a simple thank you card and her dad's favorite chocolate, wanting to make their celebration even more special. She scanned the elegant restaurant, taking in the sparkling chandeliers and white tablecloths, her heart swelling with pride that her dad had chosen such a beautiful place for their dinner. Then her eyes found him by the host station and her smile began to fade. After 18 years as her father's daughter, Emmy could read his body language like a book. Though his back was straight and his voice calm, she recognized the tension in his shoulders, the same tension she'd seen when people stared too long at his wheelchair in the grocery store, or when they'd speak to her instead of him, as if his disability somehow affected his ability to think or speak. "Dad," she called out softly, her footsteps quickening across the polished floor. The gift bag crinkled in her tightening grip as she approached the scene. She could hear snippets of the conversation now, could see the waiter's dismissive expression, could feel the discomfort radiating from nearby diners. "Look," the waiter was saying, his voice dripping with fake patience, "I've already explained that we're fully booked." He gestured around the half-empty restaurant, not even attempting to make his lie believable. Annie felt her cheeks grow hot. She'd seen this before. The thinly veiled discrimination, the poor excuses, the way some people looked right through her father as if his wheelchair made him invisible. But this was different. This was supposed to be their special night, the celebration of her full scholarship to UCLA, the reward for all those late nights studying while helping her dad with his physical therapy exercises. "We have a reservation," she said, stepping up beside her father's wheelchair. Her voice came out stronger than she expected, fueled by a mixture of hurt and anger. "I saw Dad make it 2 weeks ago. He even called twice to confirm." The waiter, Michael, according to his name tag, barely glanced at her. "I'm sorry, miss, but as I was explaining to your companion, we have certain standards here at the Golden Palm." Emmy's hand found her father's shoulder, feeling him tense beneath her touch. She knew he was fighting to maintain his composure, just as he had taught her to do when facing injustice. "That's my father you're talking to," she said quietly. "And he's a veteran who served this country while you were probably still learning to tie your shoes." Several diners nearby had stopped eating entirely, their attention fixed on the unfolding scene. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin, while her husband looked like he wanted to stand up and say something. Tom reached up and patted his daughter's hand. "It's okay, sweetheart. We can go somewhere else." But Amy heard the disappointment in his voice, saw how his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers. He'd been so excited about this dinner, had mentioned it during every phone call for the past 2 weeks. "No, Dad, it's not okay," she whispered, fighting back tears. This was the man who had raised her alone after her mom passed away, who had never missed a parent-teacher conference despite his chronic pain, who had helped her study for the SAIDs from his hospital bed during his last surgery recovery. This isn't right. The gift bag in her hand suddenly felt heavy with all the love and pride it represented. She'd been so excited to give it to him over dinner, to see his face light up when he opened it. Now it felt like a reminder of everything this waiter was trying to take from them. Through her tears, Emmy noticed movement in a corner of the restaurant. A man in a black shirt was standing up from his table, his expression determined. She didn't immediately recognize him, focused as she was on her father and their ruined evening. The background music seemed to fade away, replaced by the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears. She watched as nearby diners shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some looking ashamed, others angry, but few willing to intervene. The chandelier light caught the tears in her eyes, creating tiny prisms that fractured her vision of the scene. "Miss," Michael began again, his tone suggesting he was doing them a favor, "perhaps you and your father would be more comfortable at." But before he could finish his sentence, a quiet yet authoritative voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I think they'd be most comfortable at the table they reserved." The voice came from behind them, and as Amy turned to look, she realized their quiet evening was about to take an unexpected turn. Keanu Reeves had chosen his corner table at the Golden Palm specifically for its privacy, hoping to spend a quiet evening reviewing his latest script. The restaurant's soft lighting and gentle background music usually provided the perfect atmosphere for focusing on work. But for the past 15 minutes, he hadn't read a single word. Instead, his attention was fixed on the scene unfolding by the host station. He'd noticed the veteran when he first wheeled in, recognizing the quiet dignity in the man's bearing, something Keanu had seen countless times while researching military roles. The pin on the veteran's jacket caught the light every so often, a small but powerful reminder of service and sacrifice. From his vantage point, Keanu could see everything clearly. The waiter's barely concealed contempt, the veteran's remarkable composure, and now the daughter's arrival and her heartbreaking attempt to stand up for her father. The script in front of him lay forgotten, its pages stirring slightly under the air conditioning. As he observed, Keanu's hand unconsciously tightened around his water glass. He'd witnessed discrimination before, had even experienced it earlier in his career, but this was different. This was raw and real, happening right in front of him, and the restaurant's elegant atmosphere only made it feel more jarring. He watched as other diners pretended not to notice, some burying their faces in their menus, others whispering behind their hands. A young couple at a nearby table filmed discreetly with their phones, but made no move to intervene. The chandelier light reflected off their wine glasses, creating dancing patterns on the tablecloth that seemed to mock the seriousness of the moment. Through the kitchen's swinging doors, Keanu could see staff members gathering, whispering among themselves. One busboy looked particularly distressed, repeatedly glancing toward the host station before disappearing into the back, presumably to find someone in charge. The actor's thoughts drifted to his own mother, who had worked multiple jobs to support him while dealing with her own health challenges. He thought about the countless veterans he'd met during film research, men and women who had given so much for their country only to face prejudice and obstacles back home. The daughter's voice carried across the restaurant, clear and hurt. "This isn't right." The simple truth in those words seemed to hang in the air, challenging everyone within earshot. Keanu noticed an elderly woman dabbing at her eyes with a napkin, her husband's hand covering hers in silent support. The waiter's voice grew louder, more insistent, as if volume could make his discrimination more acceptable. But it was the veteran's quiet dignity that truly commanded attention, the way he sat straight in his wheelchair, one hand reaching up to comfort his daughter, even in the midst of his own humiliation. Keanu found himself studying the man's face, noting the lines that spoke of both hardship and joy, the way his eyes remained steady even as his fingers gripped his wheelchair's armrests. There was a story there, one of sacrifice and resilience, being dismissed by someone who couldn't, or wouldn't, see past his own prejudices. The script beside Keanu's plate contained dialogue about heroes and villains, about right and wrong, about standing up for what you believe in. But here, in this moment, real life was writing a more powerful scene than any movie could capture. As he watched the daughter fight back tears, Keanu remembered something his martial arts instructor had once told him: the true measure of a warrior is not in knowing when to take action, but in being absolutely clear about why you must act. The waiter's voice cut through his thoughts again, each word dripping with condescension as he suggested they find somewhere more suitable. Something shifted in Keanu's chest, a quiet certainty that this was one of those moments where staying silent wasn't an option. He looked down at his script one last time, at the character he was supposed to be studying. A man who had to choose between comfortable anonymity and standing up for what's right. Sometimes life had a way of making art feel almost too relevant. The veteran's daughter was speaking now, her voice trembling but determined. Keanu could see other diners starting to shift uncomfortably in their seats, perhaps finally feeling the weight of their own silence. The moment stretched like a rubber band pulled too tight, waiting for something, or someone, to make it snap. Quietly, deliberately, Keanu pushed his chair back from the table. The soft scraping sound was barely audible over the restaurant's background music, but to him, it felt like a declaration. As he stood, he caught his reflection in one of the restaurant's decorative mirrors, not as a movie star, but as a human being who had the power to help right a wrong. The chandelier light caught the veteran's pin again, sending a small flash across the room like a signal. Keanu straightened his black shirt and took a step forward, knowing that what happened next would transform an ordinary evening into something none of them would forget. The sound of steady footsteps across the polished floor made several heads turn. Keanu Reeves approached the host station with the same quiet confidence he brought to his movie roles, though this wasn't a scene from a script. This was real life, with real consequences. "I couldn't help overhearing," he said, his voice calm but carrying clearly across the now hushed restaurant. "And I think there's been a misunderstanding about the Golden Palm standards." The waiter, Michael, turned around and froze, his eyes widening as he recognized who was speaking. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no words came out. The veteran and his daughter looked equally surprised, though they remained quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. "You see," Keanu continued, now standing beside Tom's wheelchair, "I've been coming here for years, and I know for a fact that the restaurant's standards include treating every guest with respect and dignity." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Especially those who've served our country." A murmur went through the dining room. Phones appeared in hands, but Keanu paid them no attention. His focus remained on the situation at hand, on the veteran whose evening had been ruined by prejudice, on the daughter whose tears were still visible in the chandelier light. "Sir," Michael stammered, his earlier arrogance evaporating, "Mr. Reeves, I was just explaining that we're fully booked and I can see at least 7 empty tables from where I'm standing, Keanu interrupted gently, including one right next to mine that would be perfect for a father and daughter celebrating a special occasion. He turned to Tom and Emmy, his expression warning. I heard it's about a college acceptance. Congratulations. Emmy managed a small smile, while Tom nodded, still processing this unexpected turn of events. The gift bag in Emmy's hands had stopped trembling, her knuckles regaining their color as she loosened her grip. But the dress code, Michael made one last attempt, though his voice had lost all its previous authority. Keanu looked down at his own casual black shirt and jeans, then back at the waiter. I think what matters isn't what someone wears, but who they are. And from what I've seen, this gentleman has shown more class in the past 15 minutes than. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. The elderly couple who had been watching earlier were now smiling broadly. The woman wiped away what looked like happy tears, while her husband nodded approvingly. Other diners had stopped pretending not to watch and were openly observing the scene, many with expressions of relief that someone had finally stood up to the discrimination. You know, Keanu continued, I've played a lot of roles in my career, but the most important ones aren't on camera. They're the moments when we choose to be who we really are. He gestured to Tom's veteran's pin. This gentleman made his choice years ago when he decided to serve our country. I'm making mine now. The busboy who had disappeared earlier returned with the restaurant manager, who took in the scene with growing alarm, particularly when he recognized Keanu Reeves standing beside a wheelchair-using veteran with dozens of phones recording the moment. Would you mind if I joined you for dinner? Keanu asked Tom and Amy. I'd love to hear about your college plans and maybe share some stories about how my mom taught me that what matters isn't how people look or move, but who they are inside. Before Tom could respond, the restaurant manager stepped forward, his face flushed with embarrassment. The evening was about to take another turn, but something had already changed in the atmosphere of the Golden Palm. The air felt lighter somehow, as if a dark cloud had been blown away by a fresh breeze of human decency. In that moment, phones continued recording, but they were capturing something more meaningful than just a celebrity encounter. They were documenting a simple truth, that sometimes the most powerful acts of humanity come not from grand gestures, but from quietly standing beside someone and saying, "This isn't right." The chandelier light caught the veteran's pin one more time, but now it seemed to shine differently, not as a target for discrimination, but as a badge of honor being given its proper respect, thanks to one person's decision to transform an ordinary evening into an extraordinary example of human dignity. The restaurant manager, Mr. Chen, moved swiftly through the dining room, his face a mixture of concern and professional composure. He'd owned the Golden Palm for 15 years, building its reputation on excellent service and treating every guest like family. Now, in the span of a few minutes, one waiter's actions threatened to undo years of goodwill. Mr. Miller, he addressed Tom directly, bowing slightly. I just heard what happened, and I cannot begin to express how deeply sorry I am. His voice carried genuine remorse, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. This is not what the Golden Palm stands for. Not now, not ever. The manager turned to Michael, who seemed to shrink under his stern gaze. Hand over your apron, he said quietly but firmly. We'll discuss your final paycheck tomorrow. For now, please leave the premises. The words were professional, but the message was clear. Discrimination had no place in his restaurant. Michael's face reddened as he fumbled with his apron strings. Several diners watched with approval as he made his way toward the staff exit, his earlier arrogance replaced by shame. The busboy who had reported the incident quickly stepped forward to take his place. Mr. Miller, Miss Miller, Mr. Chen continued, your entire meal tonight will be complimentary, though I understand if you prefer to dine elsewhere. He glanced at Keanu, who still stood protectively near Tom's wheelchair. And Mr. Reeves, thank you for reminding us what true class looks like. Emmy clutched her gift bag closer, torn between lingering hurt and the manager's sincere apology. Her father reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. What do you think, sweetheart? Should we give the Golden Palm another chance? The elderly couple who had watched everything unfold suddenly spoke up. Oh, please stay, the woman called out. We'd all love to celebrate your college acceptance. Several other diners nodded in agreement, the atmosphere in the restaurant warming with genuine support. Mr. Chen signaled to the busboy, who immediately began preparing the best table in the house, one with perfect wheelchair accessibility and a view of the city lights. "I'd be honored if you allow us to make this right," the manager said, his eyes reflecting both regret and hope. Keanu smiled warmly. "I know a little spot near the window that would be perfect," he suggested, gesturing to a cozy corner. "Great lighting, excellent view, and—" he winked at Amy, "perfect for father-daughter celebrations." As they moved toward the table, Mr. Chen walked alongside Tom's wheelchair, sharing his own story. "My father used a wheelchair after his stroke," he explained quietly. "He taught me that a restaurant isn't just about food, it's about making everyone feel welcome, like they belong." The busboy quickly arranged fresh place settings, his movements careful and respectful. Other staff members appeared with fresh bread and water, each offering their own sincere apologies with their service. The whole restaurant seemed to be working together to transform an ugly moment into something beautiful. "Starting tomorrow," Mr. Chen announced, not just to Tom and Amy, but to everyone within earshot, "our entire staff will undergo additional training on inclusive service. And we'll be implementing a new program, offering special discount nights for veterans and their families." He looked at Tom. "Perhaps you'd consider being our consultant for accessibility improvements." Tom nodded, visibly moved by the manager's genuine desire to learn and improve. Around them, diners had stopped pretending not to watch and were openly smiling at the scene's positive turn. Some were already making notes in their phones about the restaurant's upcoming veterans program. Keanu pulled out a chair for Emmy, then positioned himself so Tom's wheelchair fit comfortably at the table. "Now," he said with genuine interest, "tell me about this college acceptance. I heard UCLA has an excellent film program. Is that where you're headed?" The gift bag Emmy had been clutching finally found its place on the table, no longer a reminder of ruined plans, but instead part of an unexpected and extraordinary evening. Mr. Chen himself went to the kitchen to ensure their meals would be perfect, while the busboy hovered nearby, ready to provide anything they might need. Through the restaurant's windows, the city lights twinkled against the darkening sky, as if the universe itself was celebrating this moment of humanity prevailing over prejudice. The same chandeliers that had earlier illuminated discrimination now cast a warm glow over a scene of redemption, proving that sometimes the worst moments can bring out the best in people. What started as a simple celebration dinner had transformed into something much more meaningful. As Tom, Amy, and Keanu settled into their conversation, the evening took on a warmth that no one could have predicted. The gift bag Amy had brought finally found its moment, her father's eyes lighting up at the sight of his favorite chocolates and the heartfelt card she'd chosen. "You know," Keanu said, after they'd shared stories about college dreams and Hollywood adventures, "I think tonight proves something my mother always told me. Sometimes the worst moments bring out the best in people." He gestured around the restaurant, where something remarkable was happening. The elderly couple who had witnessed everything had struck up a conversation with another family about their own son who served overseas. A young woman at the bar was sharing her experience of helping her grandfather, also a veteran, navigate public spaces in his wheelchair. The restaurant had become a place of connection and understanding. Mr. Chen returned to their table periodically, not just to check on their meal, but to share his developing plans for making the Golden Palm more accessible. "We're thinking of hosting monthly dinners for veterans and their families," he explained enthusiastically. "Would you be willing to help us spread the word at the VA Center?" Tom nodded, his earlier humiliation replaced by a sense of purpose. "I know plenty of vets who'd appreciate a welcoming place like this," he said, "especially knowing they'll be treated with respect." As that evening continued, phones around the restaurant had captured moments of the interaction. By dessert time, the story had already started spreading across social media. But unlike many viral moments, this one was inspiring real change. "Dad," Emmy said suddenly, looking up from her phone, "you won't believe this. People are sharing their own stories of standing up against discrimination. They're using #GoldenHearts to talk about making places more welcoming for everyone." Keanu smiled, cutting into his chocolate cake. Sometimes people just need to see that it's possible to make a difference. One person standing up can inspire others to do the same. The night had grown late, but nobody seemed ready for it to end. The city lights twinkled outside the windows, casting a gentle glow over their table. Other diners stopped by to shake Tom's hand, thank him for his service, or share their own family stories of military service and overcoming challenges. "You know what the best part of this evening is?" Tom said, looking at his daughter with pride. "It's not just about what happened here, it's about what happens next." He was right. Within weeks, the Golden Palm had become a model for other restaurants in how to create truly inclusive spaces. Mr. Chen's veteran program had expanded to include regular events where service members could share their stories and build connections with the community. The busboy who had first reported the incident was promoted to head waiter, his quick action to stand up for what was right recognized and rewarded. He made sure to personally welcome every guest who came through the doors, regardless of their appearance or abilities. Emmy's college essay about that evening earned her additional scholarships, but more importantly, it inspired her to start a campus organization dedicated to making spaces more accessible for everyone. "My dad taught me that change doesn't always come from big actions," she would tell new members. "Sometimes it comes from simply refusing to accept discrimination as normal." Back at the VA Center, Tom found himself sharing the story with fellow veterans, not as a tale of discrimination, but as proof that society was changing for the better. The veterans support group he led grew larger, strengthened by the knowledge that their community had allies willing to stand up for them. Keanu kept his connection with the Miller family, occasionally dropping by the Golden Palm to join their regular father-daughter dinners. His quiet act of standing up for what was right had inspired others in Hollywood to use their influence to promote inclusion and respect. The Golden Palm itself had transformed. The chandelier light that once illuminated an act of discrimination now shone down on a place where everyone was truly welcome. Mr. Chen had installed a plaque near the entrance that read, "Every guest who enters here brings their own light to our table." As the story spread, it touched people in ways no one could have predicted. Other restaurants reached out to learn about making their spaces more accessible. Veterans shared their own experiences, finally feeling heard and valued. And somewhere in Los Angeles, a father and daughter's ruined evening had become a catalyst for lasting change. The final dessert plates were cleared away that first night, but the sweetness of human kindness lingered. As they prepared to leave, Keanu helped Tom with his jacket while Amy gathered her things. The restaurant had emptied, but the warmth of connection filled every corner. Sometimes, Tom said, looking around at the place that had changed from a source of pain to a symbol of hope, the best celebrations aren't the ones we plan, but the ones that remind us how good people can be to each other. The city night embraced them as they left, stars twinkling above like countless points of light, each one a reminder that in the darkness of discrimination, it only takes one person to stand up and help others find their way to something better.